I live sorry, for those of you who don't know me all that well, I live in Minneapolis. I moved here from Winnipeg, Canada for grad school. I like to joke that I'm probably the only person in the history of Minnesota to ever move here for the weather. A lot of people around the country might know Minnesota, not only for the snow, but also for some of our music. The lakes, Minnesotans tend to be a little bit understated. I think it's one of the things that we have in common with Arkansas. Our license plates say that we're the state of 10,000 lakes. I think there's actually like 12,000 something or other. There would definitely be states in the country that would round that 12,000 up to like 18,000 when they're talking on their and promoting their cities. But this is a photo of one of the main lakes in the Twin Cities metro area, and you can see the downtown is right behind it. So we've got a very accessible, natural lifestyle, sailing, hunting, fishing, hiking, whatever, within very easy reach of a lot of our residential areas, as do you. Unfortunately, one of the things that we're also now known for, that we're going to get into more of a discussion for, is that this is the city where George Floyd was killed by the Minneapolis Police Department. Happened about 8 miles from my home, happened just a few blocks away from where some of my family members live. And as much of a turmoil as it caused, or touched off for the country and even internationally, it was certainly more so here. Not as bad as some media portrayed it. The entire metro wasn't on fire as some media portrayed it, but it was definitely quite bad for weeks in terms of the stress. And of course, that came right on top of COVID. So before we kind of get into the meat of the presentation, and I won't repeat what Madeline has kindly shared already, but College Recruiter believes that every student and recent graduate deserves a great career. We created that mantra, slogan, whatever you want to call it, I think about 5-6 years ago. And if your organization does not yet have something like that and really live it every single day, I would urge you to do that. We literally turn away business certainly on a monthly basis, probably once a week, once every couple of weeks, when we feel that the employer, the partner, whoever it might be, just does not align well with that mission. In fact, we had an employer register earlier today that we're doing some due diligence on. I know that your career service offices, whether you're a Handshake or Simplicity or Grad Leaders or whatever school, you're doing a lot of the same things on your end for similar reasons. But as Madeline was talking about, we help about 3 million students and recent grads. For us, a recent grad is anybody with 0 to 3 years of experience per year. About 1.5 million postings, 40,000 plus articles, blogs, videos, etc. And one of the ways that we partner with organizations is by providing them with the kinds of jobs that we have on our site, or some of the jobs that we have on our site. And then they can run those on their site. There's no charge for that. We also have like white papers and stuff like that. So, feel free to reach out if you feel that any of our content, job or non-job, can be a benefit to you. So as far as the conversation this morning goes, let's start with talking about COVID. A lot of us think of COVID as really starting in March of 2020. And that's when the biggest impact on this country happened. But as we're looking back, and I think 2, 3, 4 years from now, I think that we're actually going to see that COVID really became a reality in the fall, maybe early or very late fall, November-ish of 2019. One of my family members in the UK was one of the first people in the Western Hemisphere to be tested positive for COVID. He's a physician, and he was vacationing with 12 other physicians. One of them had just come back from a conference in Singapore, and that guy was asymptomatic. He infected all 11 of his physician friends, and the British health authorities whisked them all away literally in the middle of the night in ambulances to protect them and their families because they were worried about retribution. That happened at the end of January 2020. Before he was whisked away, when he was symptomatic, but just kind of feeling blah. Like for many of us who have had COVID, there's that feeling of sort of fatigue. He had that, but early on, nobody really understood what COVID was or what symptoms to look out for. But he spent the better part of 3 days with one of my kids who was a college junior and on her way to a study abroad program in Prague. That was the middle of February. A couple days later, she's in Prague and basically gets a knock on the door, and it's the Czech health authorities. She was the first person in the Czech Republic to be known to have been exposed to somebody who was positive with COVID. So she was basically patient one in the Czech Republic. She was also taken away in an ambulance, civilly committed for 5 days. And everybody who was with her was in full hazmat gear, just like you'd see on, dystopian movies or whatever, with the whole bubble thing and whatever. Because she was in the Czech Republic, almost nobody spoke English. It was clearly a pretty scary and stressful time for everybody. This was the very beginning of February. So for my family and the organization that I founded, it was about a month and a half before most of the country really understood what was happening. We kind of had a bit of a peek into what was in store. We've certainly made a lot of adaptations as far as work went. It wasn't nearly as difficult for College Recruiter as it was for some other organizations, because 100% of our employees, we're roughly a dozen to 15 people at any given time, but 100% of us have worked remotely since 1997. In 1997, if you worked remotely, most of your friends thought that really meant that you didn't work at all and that you were just pretending to work. For us, clearly that was kind of different. COVID, as I'm going to discuss, had a lot of impacts on the economy. And I don't think it's going to be for years before we really understand just what the impact was. The George Floyd protests, some of the violence that was associated with it, the turmoil in the country. The epicenter, of course, was here in Minneapolis. One of the scariest incidents is in this photo, and if you look closely enough, you can see a couple of my kids in that crowd. But what happened was that the police, the counties and the cities shut down the entire freeway system in the Twin Cities to allow for the protests to happen safely. I think it was on a Sunday. And so there were literally tens of thousands of people marching in various areas. It was 100% peaceful. There were just like no issues with it. Somehow this tanker trailer truck gets onto the freeway. There's a lot of dispute about how that happened, why that happened, but he was proceeding along right near downtown Minneapolis at 80 miles an hour, and which is about 25 miles an hour more than the speed limit. And he comes barreling into this crowd of protesters. Incidents like that just exacerbated everything. Now let's keep in mind, so COVID starts, maybe November. We're starting to hear reports of it from China in January. There was lots of video of the Chinese authorities welding people into their homes, people that wouldn't stop leaving their homes. By February, you're starting to see massive outbreaks in Italy and the UK. And by March, it's really steamrolling through the US. 2 months later, the end of May, is when George Floyd was killed. And then stuff like this is happening days after. It was obviously a really, really awful time for all of us. And not only personally, but professionally for a lot of us. It really exacerbated a lot of the stress, led to a lot of layoffs and a lot of labor disruption. So let's talk about the labor market. I've got about, I don't know, half a dozen or so slides to just sort of set the scene for what was happening in the labor market before early 2020 and what happened right then, just how bad it was. It's hard to wrap our minds around that. And then also what we're now seeing in this, I think the best word to describe it would be bizarre recovery. Very uneven, very widely differentiated in terms of who's doing well and who's not doing well geographically, by industry, experience level, education, gender, race, everything. It is a bizarre labor market, to say the least. So as this chart that pulls data from the US Department of Labor shows, you can see that starting in about 2010 through early 2020, the unemployment rate was pretty steadily dropping. Part of that was during the Obama administration, part of that was during the Trump administration, and then COVID hits, and then there's this massive spike. So we went from an unemployment rate of under 4% to an employment rate of over 14% almost overnight. Similarly, the employment rate, the percentage of net new jobs being added in the economy, there was a report out this morning, as there is the first Friday of every month. This you can see at around the same time, from about 28 to 29 through when COVID hit in the spring of 2020, we had basically an upward progression, meaning that more new jobs were being created month over month than were being lost. And that trend was accelerating. We went from adding roughly 130,000 jobs in a month to a little over 150,000. And then we fell off a cliff right when COVID hit, kind of February, March kind of timing. The impact on wages and the unemployment rate, at a high level, a lot of people might assume that the higher the unemployment rate, the lower the wages. And economists would just say supply and demand. It's not so clean. For those of you on the employer side, for those of you in the career service side that are monitoring this, you know that if unemployment jumps up in a week or a month, you can't go to your labor force and say, oh, well, I know we were paying you $25 an hour, but there are more people like you out there that are looking for work now, so we're going to pay you $18 an hour. It just doesn't work that way. Even with new hires, you're going to be, to an extent, kind of locked into what you're paying similarly employed people in your workforce for similar kind of work. So there's some lag, there's some disconnect between the unemployment rate and wages. But you can see from the time this graph started in 2000, so what is that, 21 years ago now, that basically earnings adjusted for inflation have been rising. And that since 2010, the unemployment rate was dropping. That all changed, of course, overnight. When COVID hit, you can see March and April, the unemployment rate just fell off a cliff. We were down over 20 million jobs in just weeks. It was probably the largest loss of jobs in US history, including the Great Depression, on a per capita basis within a certain period of time. There's some debate on how you look at the stats. If it wasn't worse than what happened in the Great Depression when the stock market fell, then it was certainly second only to that. And then as the economy started to reopen, as people started to work from home, and I think very importantly, shop from home, you started to see jobs being added back. But I bet if you were to go to the average person on the street and ask them today, how many people are working as compared to before COVID, I think the average person on the street would say about the same. It's not true. There are still 5 million fewer people working than there were right before COVID. So despite that, you still hear largely anecdotally, but I think there's a tremendous truth to it, that employers are not able to hire everybody that they need to. Now, the main purpose of my presentation today isn't to tell you all of this. I think most of us know all of this. We might need some refreshers. Some of us might have a better handle on the data than others. But what I want to talk about mostly isn't that this is happening and then you walk away and say, well, that's interesting, but you don't have anything actionable to do about it. What I'd like to do by the end of this presentation is for the career service people that are helping employers figure out how to hire students and recent grads, and the employers in the webcast to understand what they can do about this situation. So if we look at this chart, what it shows is that right when COVID hit, there was a massive number of job openings, that spike that goes up right after 2019 into 2020. And then you see that it starts to improve again. It shows the number of people available, unemployed, they're actively looking for work, per job opening. So at its worst, when the economy was at its worst in March, April of 2020, there were 5 Americans who were actively looking for work for every job opening. So in an economy like that, employers have no difficulty filling openings. But today, what you're seeing is that there's under 1 person available who actively looking for work for every job opening. Well, no wonder that employers are having such a hard time finding work. Not only do you have to find that person, but in this kind of a market, you've got to convince that person that your opportunity is better for them than the similar opportunity being offered by a similar employer located right across the street from you. This is no longer an economy where you can just say to a prospective employee, hey, I see that you're qualified and I'm going to pay you money. And so therefore you're going to do this work. You have to convince them that they're better off with you than they are with that employer across the street. Some employers are doing that well and some aren't. So what are the hardest kinds of jobs to fill? Well, a lot of them are the low-paying hourly jobs. It's in a way ironic that a lot of people have been saying for years that these people who are making minimum wage, that they should invest in themselves, they should find a better job, they should make more money. And then now that those people are doing that, the same people who were criticizing them for being lazy are now frustrated when they go into a retail shop or restaurant or whatever and find that it's understaffed. So what people have been telling the lowest paid people in society for years is now actually happening. And in some ways, we're reaping the benefits, and in other ways, we're definitely being inconvenienced by restaurants being closed. One of my favorite restaurants in the Twin Cities is closed now Mondays and Tuesdays because they simply can't staff for those days. I'll walk into a retail shop, and 2 years ago, you might have been able to see 10 people employed there and they were all busy. Now you might see 6 people there and they're just going nuts because there just simply aren't enough of them. Those employers are ready, willing, and able to hire more people, but they feel that they can't. Let's talk about why they can't, whether there's something that they can do about that. So who are these people? Who are the people that haven't returned to the labor market? There are literally millions of them. The real unemployment rate includes people who are not officially in the unemployed. So to be unemployed, you have to be on unemployment insurance. You have to be actively looking for work. Some people's unemployment insurance, depending upon the state, has run out. Some people who are unemployed, they're in a state where they would qualify for unemployment insurance, but they're not doing what they need to do in that state to get those benefits, like they're not actively working or looking for work. Those people aren't included in the real numbers. So the real unemployment rate is a little over 10%, which is significantly higher than it was right before COVID. There are about 2 million unfilled jobs if every single person who was looking for a job accepted a job that was open. And that was published, I think, about a month ago by Glassdoor. So let me say it another way to be clear. If every single person who was unemployed today accepted a job, there would still be 2 million job openings unfilled, according to Glassdoor. What we're seeing at College Recruiter, another job search site, is very consistent with this. I have no doubt that Glassdoor's numbers are accurate. Who are the missing workers? Well, I mentioned earlier that gender definitely plays a big role in it. In our industry, in the HR, talent acquisition, career services industry, most of us are female. Most of us have kids, whether they're before the age of going to school, 2 years old and 3 years old, or teenagers or whatever. But most of us are female with kids. And it's that demographic, those basically mothers of school-age kids that have been hit the hardest, that are the most likely to have dropped out of the labor market. As an employer, we need to tap into that market. We need to find a way as a country of making it feasible for those people to go back to work. One of the ways that we can do that, one of the consistent concerns that these mostly women, mostly with school-age kids have, is the safety. Can their kids go back to school? There's been a huge increase in the number of young children being homeschooled. There's been a huge increase in the number of young children going to school, but online, or going to private, sometimes parochial schools, where maybe the parent perceives that as being a safer environment. There are just fewer kids in the building, all sorts of things. The workplace. We're seeing at College Recruiter a significant difference between the number of applicants that employers get if they state in their job posting ads that employees have to be either fully vaccinated or tested once a week, something along those lines, versus employers who, well, in a small number of cases, won't hire people who are vaccinated, or in some cases just simply aren't talking about it. The reality is that most people, when they're choosing between employers, if one employer is able to say, our workplace is safer, not just for COVID, but just for a whole range of issues, you're naturally going to get more people choosing to go to work in that place of work. Similarly, we're seeing more and more candidates explicitly, without prompting, without an employer saying, you need to tell us if you're vaccinated. I'm seeing lots of candidates now on their LinkedIn profiles, on their resumes, right up at the top. They're saying fully vaccinated because they know that more and more employers are requiring that, sometimes for legal reasons, sometimes for policy reasons. And that, so if they tell that recruiter right up front, hey, I'm fully vaccinated, it's almost like saying to them that I grew up in Canada, but I am legally allowed to work in the US. It kind of checks a box for that recruiter. They know that later on in the hiring process, they're not going to have a problem for that reason with this candidate. It removes an issue from the table. But just keep in mind that that plays in both directions, right? The candidate wants to know that later on in the hiring process that they're not going to have an issue, that they're not going to say, oh, well, wait a second, your workplace is only 12% vaccinated. The place across the street is 88%. For myself and my family, I'm going to be safer at the place with 88%. So I'm going to choose to work there. If you can tell them right up front that you have to be vaccinated or you have to have negative COVID testing on a weekly basis or something like that, you are going to get more applicants. Another thing that I think has an even bigger effect is compensation. This is, without a doubt, highly controversial in terms of what employers would like to believe, what employers are telling themselves and telling their candidates. There is no doubt that the data that the job board industry of which College Recruiter is a part, that we can see that job posting ads that disclose compensation range, good or bad, those postings get significantly more applicants than postings that are silent as to compensation. Not only that, but the effective cost per hire is significantly less. So you're going to get more applicants and you're going to hire more people if you simply disclose the compensation. Why is that? I think it's because a lot of us, probably most of us, don't trust employers, particularly employer that we don't already work there. If one employer says we pay competitively, and the other employer like UPS says we pay $21, as a candidate, you're, I think, more likely to trust that UPS is actually paying $21 rather than trying to guess if that other employer is paying $21 or more. You're just, it's like the bird in the hand is worth two in the bush kind of argument. Similarly, it works in the other direction too. If you're hiring a professional and let's say it's a sales position and the salary range is $100,000 to $125,000 a year, and somebody with no sales experience, they're a currently enrolled student, they're looking for a sales job and they run across that sales job. That candidate, she's probably going to say, yeah, you know, it'd be great to make $100,000 a year, maybe more, but they know they're not yet qualified for that role. So they're not going to apply. You're not going to waste all the time and effort in trying to hire somebody who's just simply not qualified. It's better for them not to contact you. Maybe 2 years from now, maybe 5 years from now, they're going to be qualified, but for today, not. So posting your wage works both for discouraging candidates who are overly qualified as well as underly qualified. If somebody's looking for a sales position and they have a long track record of succeeding and they've been making $200,000 a year, you also don't want them applying, because if you're only willing to pay them $125 top end, they're never going to take your job. And if for some reason they do take your job, they're going to quit after 3 months when a better job comes along. So disclose your compensation. The other thing is, when it comes to compensation, there's a difference between competitive and prevailing wages. A competitive wage might be what other employers in your community are paying for similar work. The prevailing wage, I look at as what the candidates are expecting to take. So if everybody in your community is paying $12 an hour for cashiers, but they aren't hiring people at $12 an hour, that $12 an hour is competitive. You're paying what the other employers are paying. But if candidates won't go to work for you as a cashier for $12 an hour, if they're only willing to go to work for you for $18 an hour, because that's what Amazon is paying in their warehouse, that's the prevailing wage. The prevailing wage is going to be what you need to pay somebody in order for them to accept the job offer. A lot of employers are truthfully paying the competitive wage, at least as far as they can ascertain what that might be. But the ones who are understaffed tend not to be paying the prevailing wage. Amazon is paying them more. UPS is paying more. If you're a candidate and you're looking at potentially working as a cashier for $12 an hour, and across the street, there's a warehouse where you can move boxes for $21 an hour, quite frankly, you'd be an idiot to take that cashier job for $12 an hour. And the difference between making $21 an hour versus 12 in most areas of the country is the difference between being in poverty and not being in poverty. It's the difference between being on food stamps and not being on food stamps. If as an employer, your business model essentially requires at least some of your employees to receive public assistance like food stamps, I think you should be re-examining the business model. I don't think that the government should be subsidizing wages for employees. If $12 an hour is going to put your employees into poverty, I think that we should be paying them more. And I understand that means realistically that some businesses aren't going to survive because they can't afford to pay more. But I also think that a tremendous number of businesses are just going to have to redistribute what they're paying. Their shareholders might get less. Their owners might get less. And I think that's one of the things that's going to come out of this COVID, George Floyd, et cetera, period in the economy, is that I think we're going to see the lowest paid, most disadvantaged workers lifted up, and that you're going to see some push down on those that for decades have been making a lot more, way more, hundreds of times more, thousands of times more in some cases than those lowly paid workers. So from an employer perspective, what are some strategies? I see loads of articles, videos, commentary, whatever, that career fairs are dead. A career fair in the traditional sense, where you gather hundreds of people in a room and then have them walk up and shake hands and talk to each other, is certainly of great concern to a lot of people right now because of COVID. Career fairs, for another reason, are also problematic. And that's one that I don't think we really fully appreciate. And that is, most of them happen during work hours. They're scheduled during that time for the convenience of the host. In our world, that's generally going to be the career service office, and the people who are really footing the bill, and that's going to be the employers. But if you're a non-traditional student, let's say that you're working full-time, let's say you have a kid or two at home, you may find it a lot easier to go to a career fair in the evening or weekend, because your spouse, a friend, whatever, can watch your kids. Or you may not be working during the day, but you may be available in the evening or weekend. So one thing I would say for the career services and also the employers that sort of host their own career fairs is think about the time and location of the career fairs from the perspective of the candidate. They have the power in this economy. What was convenient for us and what they were willing to go along with until a couple of years ago is just simply not the reality. And I understand that then shifts the burden to the employers. But remember, there are more job openings than there are candidates. And so we can pretend or wish that none of this was true, but it is true. And no single school, no single employer is going to change that. I also think that there's a significant difference between an in-person career fair versus an online career fair. I also think that there's significant differences between different kinds of online career fairs. I'm a member of NACE. I get the NACE Digest. And just 2 weeks ago, 3-4 weeks ago, there was a fascinating discussion between a bunch of different career service office people sharing tips and tricks. What's working? Are you getting students registering for your online career fairs? Are they showing up? Are employers happy? Are they unhappy? It was staggering to me, the disparity between them. As best as I could figure, the schools that were succeeding with their online career fairs had organized them and structured them in a very fundamentally different way than the schools that were struggling with them. The schools that were struggling with them basically took the in-person traditional model and moved it online. The schools that were succeeding looked at it from a fresh perspective. What would the candidate like? Does the candidate want to wait in line for the opportunity to speak to an employer or chat with an employer for 30 seconds, at the end of which the employer is just going to tell them, go to our website and apply? Is that what candidates want from a career fair? Or are they looking to engage with that employer? Hey, I've already applied. I haven't heard anything back. What's the status of my application? How long does it take before I should hear back? I applied to a job, but I don't know what the wages are. What are the wages? What I think online career fairs are better for is not to generate interest in your organization, but to advance people through the process after they've applied already. We'll see whether my speculation is right, but that seemed to be a common theme in that NACE discussion. Now, if there's one thing that I'd like for everybody to take away from this presentation, and I apologize in advance for anybody who might be offended by like a PG-13 phrase, but what I'd like to say is that for decades, employers used to be able to fully staff, even if they paid their employees like crap and treated them like crap. What we're finding today is that employers can fully staff if they treat employees like crap or pay them like crap, but not both. I won't go through and read this whole thread, but there was a fascinating anecdote posted to Reddit, I think maybe 2 months ago or so. And basically what the situation was an hourly employee who's getting reamed out, really criticized by text by their boss. The employee met every productivity goal for that job. They packed the boxes that they were supposed to pack. What the boss was upset about was that the employee was sitting on a chair while doing that. It had nothing to do with the productivity. It had nothing to do with the employee being disrespectful or being late to work or whatever. But basically, the boss was a control freak. I think that you're only doing your job the way I want you to if you are standing for the entire 8-hour day. That's a great example of treating an employee like crap. So the employee basically says, you know what? Screw it. I'm not going to work here. It's a toxic environment. The management is awful. I don't have to put up with this anymore. You might be paying me like crap. You're certainly treating me like crap. I can go tomorrow to a very similar place of employment across the street in terms of the kind of work, probably get paid more, and get treated better. Who wouldn't want that? Of everybody on the call, who wouldn't want to get paid more and be treated better by just going across the street? So the employee says, I'm done, I'm out of here. And then the boss is like, whoa, 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 you know, don't leave. Let's just talk in the morning and we can work this out. And the employee's like, nope, done, I'm out of here. Have a good life. So I suspect that many of the employers on this call have similar stories to tell. Maybe you know about them. Maybe the employee has just not been as candid with you and they've just left and not burnt a bridge like this person did. But if you're wise, if you're struggling with hiring people, if you're struggling, like in this case, in retaining people, I would urge you to really look in the mirror and really think about it from the perspective of the candidate. Are you paying prevailing wages, not just competitive wages? And are you treating them well? Are you providing them with opportunities for advancement and clearly laying that out? Do you have mentorship opportunities? Do you have regular check-ins, not just once a year and you get a formal review, but are you regularly, daily, weekly meeting with these people and telling them, this is what you're doing well, this is what you're not doing well, these are the tools I can give you. Another example, I think this one came out of Florida. The guy applied to 60 different entry-level jobs. The jobs all said no experience required, and he had that experience, if you can call it. He was qualified on the face of his resume for every single one of the 60 jobs that he applied to. He got one interview. This was just a couple of months ago. So some employers are saying nobody's applying to our jobs and we can't hire anybody. I think the reality is, for a lot of employers, they're losing applications in their system. People are applying, but those employers are not following up with them properly or promptly or both. So what do we do about this? One thing is, I'm seeing a huge increase in the number of employers who are putting the assessments at the front of the application process. We're doing that at College Recruiter now. We started about a year and a half ago. When you apply to any of our jobs, you automatically, if your application, we're not screening, nobody's looking at your application, but as soon as you apply, you go right into an assessment. What we have found over and over again is that candidates with the most impressive resumes are often, not always, but often assessing the worst. And candidates with the least impressive resumes are often assessing the best. If I have to choose between hiring somebody who assesses well and somebody who just has a good looking resume, I'm going to go for that person who assesses well every single time, because they've demonstrated through the assessment that they actually have the competencies, they can actually do the work. It's the difference between having a degree in marketing and having experience in marketing. Wouldn't you rather hire the person with experience in marketing than somebody who merely has a degree in marketing? Also, interview scheduling. This whole thing with sending emails back and forth, are you available this time? Are you available that time? And then you need to change this is just such BS. There are bots out there that are super cheap, that are super effective, that work incredibly well, and just take that off of the desk of your recruiters and have the candidates schedule interviews themselves. You can put in when you're available, when the recruiters are available, and you let the automated system interact with the candidate, and they can schedule an interview right now. So they should apply, they should get assessed, and they should immediately, if their assessment is good enough, they should immediately be taken into a system where they can schedule an interview. There's absolutely no reason why in 2021, we make candidates wait weeks or sometimes even months to hear back from us. They should be able to apply, get assessed, and have an interview scheduled all within about half an hour. And all without you even knowing it until an interview pops up on your calendar. But if you know the candidates that you want, if you know what they need to assess to, why wouldn't you want to have a 10-minute screening interview with them tomorrow before the employer across the street hires them 2 days from now? Another thing is authenticity. We all talk about Gen Z and how they're into authenticity, but what employer has ever admitted that they are not a family-friendly place, or that we don't believe in work-life balance? It's throwaway language for most of us. Be authentic. If I talked to an employer yesterday, and since I think she said May of 2020, they've required 100% of their employees to work in the office in Manhattan. And it's a fairly small office, like 25 people. And the owner said to me that she needs to do that because she needs to know if the employees are working, what they're working on. And she literally said, and I need them to keep me company. Well, that's pretty dysfunctional. But if you've got this top-down, very controlling, sort of militaristic environment like she does, be authentic about that. Some people like that. Some employees like that. Those are the people you want to attract. You don't want the people that we attract where we measure their productivity based on outcomes and everybody works remotely. We don't really care if you show up for work at 8 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock in the morning, whether you take a 3-hour lunch break or take 3 minutes for a lunch break. Did you get your work done today? Did you get work done this week? That's what we care about. So we're going to tap into a very different kind of candidate than that more top-down militaristic kind of candidate. Treat them well, measure their productivity, communicate with them. If you've got yardsticks like that texting employer did, you need to pack a certain number of boxes per hour, per day, or whatever it is. Tell them, this is how I'm going to evaluate you. Be objective, create measurements, and share that data. Discuss, where does that come from? Did you just make it up? Or is that actually based on some kind of track record for what your employees can do? And then pay, again, prevailing wages. The trifecta, Joe Shaker, who's the CEO of Shaker Recruitment Marketing in Chicago, says that employers need to send the candidates. They need to provide them with the right message, with the right media, and an optimized conversion process, meaning like your applicant tracking system, your assessments, your interview scheduling, it's optimized. Optimized for the candidate, not merely for the benefit of the employer. If you do all three things, not just one, not just two, but all three, then you will meet with success. They are seeing that over and over again with their clients that are succeeding or doing all three things. Their clients that are struggling are not. At the end of the day, and I'll just wrap up with one of the great lines from a Rolling Stones song, you can't always get what you want. But if you try sometimes, you might find that you actually get what you need. So if you want the best candidates, but what you really need is to be fully staffed, be fully staffed. That should hopefully get you closer to what you want. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Stephen. At this time, if anyone has any questions for Stephen or any discussion, you are welcome to drop your questions in the chat. I can facilitate those, or you are welcome to unmute yourself and show your video and interact with us verbally if you would rather do that too. So any questions?
Stephen, hey, it's Allison.
Allison.
I've noticed some interesting changes in tech recruiting. I just wanted to make a comment about, we use Stack Overflow as a recruiting tool, and they have completely stopped all job posting. They'll end job posting in March, and which I think is really fascinating, that the community is more important and what they do for that community, the tech community, than the job. And I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on job boards. I know you have a significant history in that, and seeing GitHub and other organizations beginning to charge $400 for a job posting, and there's a lot of different changes happening there. Seek Out, another amazing tool that's there. What are you seeing in job board related or tool related changes that are making a big difference right now?
Yeah, what you're seeing is what we're seeing. The solution providers, whether it's a Stack Overflow, a GitHub, a LinkedIn, an Indeed, whatever, they, like employers that are succeeding, are becoming more candidate centric. They're shifting the balance from the employer to the candidate. And from my perspective, and I think I'm kind of biased, quite frankly, but I think that the solution providers traditionally are ahead of where most employers are. I think the solution providers, job boards, for example, marketplaces, are better at marketing to candidates, that most of them are better at marketing to candidates than most employers, because it's our business, it's a profit center. And if employers want to see what's coming, look at the solution providers. So the Stack Overflows of the world that are either making it more difficult or simply just not allowing some of that interaction, what they're generally doing is saying to the employer, not like your particular place of employment or even a certain sector, but just kind of overall, that employers have been too aggressive. They've been abusing the tool. They've been making it just harassing the candidates. They're getting 120 in-mails a day, some of these software engineers, and that's causing them not to use tools like, say, a LinkedIn and GitHub and Stack Overflow. They don't want to go down that path again. So what they're basically saying to these employers is invest in the community. Don't just post an ad, don't just send a bunch of messages, but actually contribute. And I think that hopefully a lot of the career service office people will sort of nod their heads up and down big time. But if employers that want to better reach candidates on campus, one of the best ways that they can do that is to literally go on campus. And I don't mean into an interview room or into a career fair, but literally work with a professor and be a guest lecturer. 187 years ago when I was in school, we had employers that came in like once a week, and then there was a case study about their place of employment, or they talked about, this is what we do, and these are the kinds of people that we're looking for. And I still remember some of those. I can't remember like what chapter 7 was from some class. So I think that employers are going to have to get more personal by using some of the automation, assessments, automated interview scheduling. That should free up some time for your hiring managers. That should free up some time for your recruiters and get them to be more real. That's hard for those of us who are introverts to get out from behind our screens, but I think it's going to be necessary. And I think this is the new reality we're in, quite frankly. I think this is going to happen. This is going to be the case for years. I don't think this is a case for just months.
Stephen, you mentioned automation. Some of the tools that we're looking at, from a recruiting perspective, one of the things they do for us is they provide updated emails and phone numbers that are, the last 3 phone numbers, the last 3 emails. And I'm just curious, as that information becomes more and more readily available through a variety of tools, how candidate experience is going to change. It's going to be the job board, versus the, variety of ways in which we contact them. Any thoughts on that?
Sure. We use Zoom Info, not for reaching candidates, but I know that's probably the biggest use case for Zoom Info. But we use Zoom Info to keep current our database on the employer side. And so, so Allison, like if you get a new phone number, probably within weeks, Zoom Info is going to know that. And then we use Salesforce for our CRM, and then it'll just automatically update Salesforce. And that's mostly worked pretty well. We've had some technical integration challenges with it, but I think that the theory, the idea behind it is a really good one. If you've got a candidate who applies to you and she's a junior, and then you want to reach back out to her 2 years from now, it's really unlikely that she's going to be using her .edu email address, right? She's now got a Gmail address. So you're going to want a Zoom Info or a tool like that to provide you with her Gmail address. And as long as she's opted in, as long as she's gone to your site and applied, or otherwise given you her information, I see absolutely no problem with that. Now, that said, we've talked about it a little bit publicly. College Recruiter has. We've made like no big formal announcement. We're actually in the process right now, because of the privacy laws that are coming into play, the GDPR in Europe, CCPA in California, and there are a whole slew of other ones where we are going to not allow candidates to register with us. We're starting to see that from some of the job boards overseas. I haven't heard of any others in the US. The reason is, from our perspective, since we've allowed employers around the globe to advertise their job openings with us, is that it's literally impossible to comply with the privacy laws in all of these different jurisdictions. In Brazil, for example, there are privacy laws in certain regions of the country. And it's kind of like here where California has a privacy law that does not apply in Nevada. And there's no, we as Americans tend to usually think of like Brazil as being one place. And yet we understand that in the US, we have all these different jurisdictions. If we, for the global organizations to try to comply with a couple of hundred different countries, and then each one of them might have an average of 15, 20, 30 states, provinces, whatever they might call it, I think it's a losing battle. And so we chose to take the path where to focus on inbound marketing, where our content pulls the candidate in rather than us reaching out to them. It's it's the difference between listening and yelling. And we'll see if it works. There are definitely some big pros and cons, but there's no doubt it's going to be, we're in for some real turmoil.
Really
as an
interesting
industry.
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you.
Sure.
Well, thank you so much, Stephen. We have just a few minutes before we transition into our next session. We really appreciate you taking the time to share this information. It was very interesting to learn and to hear. And so I have dropped in the chat the survey link. So if all of you will take just a few minutes to fill that out for us and just leave some feedback and evaluation for Stephen in this session, we would really appreciate it. That will be dropped throughout the day after each session. And so I'm going to stop the recording now, so that way we don't have to cut and paste all of the different sessions throughout the day. And let me do that. So yeah.